is your outlook on social media? Is it overwhelming, or is it a useful tool?
Ooh, I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. I definitely feel like at the moment it's overwhelming, just because I feel like people's attention spans just kind of getting like shorter and shorter and shorter, especially with, sort of like TikTok and things like that. But I also think it is a good tool because obviously, I've been able to grow a community of people, just watching YouTube and things like that. But it's definitely kind of changed, I think. I think now you kind of need to feed the machine a little bit more, and it's less kind of organic with, sort of like how the algorithms are. They're so sophisticated now. Whereas, I have this really big beef with Instagram because I'm like, I don't want to just, like have to make reels. I just want to take photos of my records and then that's it. But it's kind of shoehorning you to do that. So in a way, I kind of see it as, yeah, it is a good thing, but also maybe within moderation, because otherwise it can be a little bit too overwhelming. So yeah, I hope that's an all right way to kick things off.
Yeah. I've definitely, like with this podcast, I've been just churning out reels and stuff. And something I said, I can't remember, it was a while back, but I've been putting out some like guitar reels. And with them, I'm using this like nice HD camera. Whereas obviously a lot of podcast reels, it's just like webcams and stuff. So within a month or so, I got more followers on my guitar reel account than I did in about a year on the podcast. And like, I'm thinking like, should I be annoyed at that, or should I just be happy about that, or kind of not think it, because it's like, I'm not saying the podcast hasn't got a massive amount of followers on TikTok or whatever, but it's just funny how like the stuff seems sort of to get pushed just because it's HD, or just because it's like it grabs your attention, not necessarily because it's like that great, not necessarily because there's much inherent like value in the content itself, if that makes sense. So it's a weird landscape, because I think we're just getting pushed loads of stuff that's not necessarily like valuable. It's just like catchy, which I guess makes it difficult, because like obviously this kind of stuff you do where people will want to know about the releases they're passionate about and shit like that, and or any kind of topics you want to cover relating to music. But then if you don't make it like immediately catchy, you're already kind of essentially almost by default dismissing a certain audience. How have you kind of dealt with that when it comes to like building your sort of platform up and getting stuff out there?
I guess the short answer is that I haven't. I'm such a Luddite, honestly. Like, I've only just sort of like in the last sort of month started to be like, oh, maybe I could do sort of like, some different stuff. But it's because I really like talking about albums and things. And I decided to bring the scores back because I thought, like a lot of people really like scores, and also, sort of like PRs really like scores as well, which definitely helps, because you just get that sort of, it goes back to the band and things like that. And, going back to your thing of social media, like when a band shares something, it definitely helps, in terms of the growth and all that sort of stuff. But I'm trying to kind of do things a little bit differently where I can. Like recently I did a sort of A to Z of my like vinyl collection and stuff, except I missed out Q, X and Z because I didn't have anything. I need to get some Queen. And yeah, it's interesting, to be fair. But I think the thing is when you find your sort of audience, like I know a lot of the people who will watch the video kind of like no matter what. And I've had a lot of people sort of mention, over the years, like, it doesn't really matter what it is you're reviewing. I'm still going to give it a listen because I appreciate, the fact that you found something interesting in it. And that's one of the biggest things that's kind of just made me kind of keep going. But again, going back to the sort of, the interview thing, I love having, like, I'm my own worst enemy when it comes to editing, because I'm like, oh, that bit's really cool. And, it's really interesting there. And then you're like, oh my God, the video is like an hour long. How am I going to edit this to condense it? Do you know what I mean? Because you have to try and get people's attention and stuff. So yeah, there's certain things where I'm kind of changing very, very slowly. But I also used to do the thing with Metal Sucks back in the day, which was apocalyptic anniversaries, which was kind of like looking at a like a retrospective album that hit a landmark, so like 25 years, 30 years, that sort of thing, which I really enjoyed. But it was kind of tricky sometimes because you'd be like, right, okay, well, what was released 30 years ago, this week or like the next week, and you had to make sure that you had everything really like planned out. But yeah, I guess I'm sort of a bit of a Luddite, really.
I think it's kind of, I think people are getting, I do wonder if there's going to be some sort of push away from, the online world at some point. I feel like we've got a way to go yet. But, I mean, whether we'll just end up going with AI and stuff, whether it's going to go like just astronomically further, who knows? But, I've got two kind of different things I wanted to, off of what you said. One perhaps is a shorter answer one, so I'll go with that. And then we'll go with the other thing, if I can remember it. And I'm still getting used to hearing my own voice in my head. It's really weird having these headphones on. Right. So when it comes to, like, you talked about the scores and stuff and reviewing albums, what's your kind of opinion on finding some sort of balance where, I suppose the best way to put it, my perspective is I've seen a lot of album reviews raving about X, Y, and Z album being the best album, and then the next week, the next album that comes out is the best album they've ever heard, and it's all like 7, 8, 9, 10 out of 10s.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you're not going to get much publicity work if you rate things 2 out of 10. Like, no one's gonna, unless there's some comedic value in it. But I feel like there's sort of we've sort of lost some sense of like sincerity, maybe. I think certainly maybe my generation don't deal so well with things like confrontation, and I think perhaps, I don't know, there could be some sort of, I don't know how you find that balance of giving like an honest review of something, because you don't, like I said, you don't want to just put out crappy reviews, because you don't want to hurt the feelings of the band either, unless you don't like them, I guess. But where's the balance between like sincerity and actually saying what you like and you don't like, but then actually maintaining keeping business coming in, because if you say you don't like something so much, you're not going to have any business,
Well, I mean, it's kind of the way I sort of see it is, and this is why a lot of the time, because I'm definitely guilty of that. I'm like, wow, this album's amazing. Next week, this album's also amazing. And I've heard, a lot of people say, like every album's amazing, and which is, I honestly don't really mind that, because I only feature stuff I kind of really like, or, I sort of like don't sort of, mind, because I just don't like it kind of goes against everything that like reviewers sort of stand for, I guess. But I don't like, just being overly harsh for no reason. Like, I'm just kind of, it's kind of like, if you've got nothing nice to say, then just don't say it. That's kind of like the way I sort of put my spin on things. And what I try and do is I almost want to like not call it an album review. It's more like album thoughts, because it's like a lot of the time it's kind of, I just like the concept behind it, or, the melodies that they put together, or the idea of the overall sort of, I'm a massive sucker for an overarching theme. And, like you said, at the end of the day, that person's really worked hard for, probably quite a number of years, really, to get that sort of material out. And yeah, like I play some riffs on guitar here and there, but I've never written an album, you know what I mean? So I think it's a tricky one, because I'm sure there's loads of other people that would be like, no, like, just be as ruthless as you want. But for me, it's just, I don't know, I just don't really kind of like doing that. It's not necessarily about, I think, annoying the bands either. And I think that's something that, like I want to sort of get across to, it's not like I'm trying to save face or anything like that. It's just kind of, I just sort of like, like the people when you see a comment on YouTube and they've gone out of their way to really like nail something, and you're like, you could have just gone off, you didn't have to like rip it to shreds. You could just be like, yeah, okay, that's not for me, and I'm going to go somewhere else. That's kind of like where I'm sort of coming from, I guess.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like, why do people feel the need to share that? You know, like what is it you drive it? Yeah, like what purpose do you sort of seek in sharing such a negative? Because obviously, the obvious thing, if you're sharing a positive opinion, it's because you want to, you know, broaden the reach of something you're passionate about. There's quite an obvious like reason for that. But sharing a negative opinion, it's like, well, what are you trying to do? Are you just trying to like destroy the band, or are you just venting? Like, what, you know? I feel like there's not such a it's not so easy to attribute some sort of positive purpose to that kind of thing. It's not like if it's maybe constructive, I guess, but a lot of these reviews aren't really, and it's not like the constructive reviews are going to get back to, you know, band headquarters. Like, yeah, with the is there a band that you maybe, as much as you appreciate them and you think they're brilliant, like just it hasn't clicked for you, or like you? I don't want to box you in, and I'm not trying to get you some sort of clickbait, like. But is there, or a collection of bands, maybe like a, you know, or a genre or something where you've heard it and you've thought like, I totally get it, but I also don't get it at all, you know?
For a long time, it was Code Orange. I was like, this band is massively overrated. They're really boring. You know, they're just not for me. And then Underneath came out, and it was my album of the year. So like, it can really change. But I would say, I'm trying to think of like off the top of my head, maybe Not Loose. I'm quite picky when it comes to hardcore, and they're just kind of they're slowly kind of getting there, because I've got a lot of my mates who are like, oh yeah, you know, like if we have a barbecue or something like that, they'll put them on, and I'm kind of like, okay, this is actually, it's all right, but it just doesn't blow me away in the way that, like, you know, that band seems to have like really loyal and devoted fans, but equally, like, there are times when I think a good example is going to be this new Thy Art Is Murder album. I'm really, really hoping that there's going to be something different, you know, something new, because I think the band are in danger of kind of, just for me personally, kind of doing the same thing too much. And that's one of the things I really love, you know, like I basically have this like running album of the year list that I start literally from January, and all of the top ones are usually something that's doing something completely different, like Avenged Sevenfold, for example. That album, yeah, is so polarizing. Like, you get people who love it or really hate it, but they are pushing the sound like completely forward. And given the fact that that's a, you know, band that headlines festivals all over the world, and they have that conviction to do that, I think that's such a big, big thing. But yeah, I don't know. I guess Not Loose. It tends to be hardcore bands, to be honest, man, because I think I'm quite picky with hardcore. Like, I like my posse hardcore, sort of Comeback Kid and things like that. But a lot of the time, I'm a bit of a prog nerd. So that sort of stuff is kind of like some of my favorites. But I'm trying to think of like who's sort of hot at the moment. I don't know. You've put me on the spot.
I thought it would be an interesting one. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of like Wargasm. I'm not a big fan of Wargasm. That's another one.
Yeah. I it's another one I kind of get. I get it, but I don't. It's not my. To be fair, most bands in that world don't quite do it for me. The more like alternative, metal influenced kind of what do you call it? Like punky rock kind of thing. I don't quite know what it is. It's something along those lines. Electronic in some ways as well. Like,
I think it's kind of like, it's sort of, it's kind of its own thing, really, and it kind of doesn't really know what it is at the moment. It's a bit of new metal, it's a bit punk, it's a bit electronic, and it's kind of starting out that sort of scene. You know, I think it's definitely something to do with the modern day and stuff. But yeah, that's just a man. Like, I get it. Like you say, I totally get why they're, you know, appealing to a lot of people. But for me, it just doesn't quite do it for me, to be fair.
Yeah. I've got one hot take that there's nothing to do with the band or the music, but it's to do with like a sort of a theme, which is I do really like Sleep Token. I think they're a great band. Yeah, I can see you're already like, where's this going? And I really like a lot of the music. But the thing I can't remember, I've said this to at least one other person, and I've had a few friends that I've said this to, and I think they've sort of agreed in some ways, others haven't. But the whole like mask thing, I'm not just sort of on the it's a gimmick kind of train, but I think when you listen to the lyrics and how it's quite a personal sounding like sound. That's a very poor way of phrasing that, but it sounds very intimate, especially with the sort of vocal techniques he uses and stuff, and some of the quieter sections and the piano sections in songs. That to me, to take the face away from that feels a little bit, I don't want to say disingenuous, that sounds a bit harsh, but it's like, to me, it doesn't perfectly, the masked element and the anonymous element doesn't perfectly line up with some of these, particularly when the songs are describing like a person, like, you know, he's talking about like about you, or about, you know, or about love, or about some sort of whatever. I just don't feel like that lines up with being an anonymous band. I think what lines up with anonymous bands is, I mean, you typically think of like what's the movie with the famous, is it the Vendetta?
V for Vendetta.
Yeah, and it's obviously like anti-establishment, and that's the kind of thing I put alongside a masked, anonymous kind of, you know, song. You know, artists maybe the anti-establishment in some way, or or discussing things that maybe are less personal. That's just my sort of hot take. I don't even know how hot a take that is. Maybe it's a lukewarm take. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I kind of get it, but I also think in terms of, you know, the anonymity allows for Sleep Token, because this is something I've been thinking about as well, and it allows for, I think, whoever Sleep Token is to bear everything and not kind of have any of not the consequences, that's the wrong kind of word, but like, you know, you can literally just say everything you want to say and no one knows really what it's about, you know, who it's directed to, and kind of it almost allows to be completely emotionally like out there, but revealing nothing, which I kind of think is quite cool. Like that, the Take Me Back to Eden is at the moment my album of the year. I absolutely love that album, and I wasn't a fan of the last album. I really liked Sundowning. That was really, really good, but the previous one just kind of didn't really do that much for me. I saw loads of critical acclaim for it, and you know, everyone said it was amazing, but it just, I don't know. I think it was just, like I said, it wasn't experimental enough. It was kind of like singy bit, breakdown, singy bit, heavy bit, you know, and they tried some little things here. But when I heard Chokehold and The Summoning, I was like, wow, okay, this is really, really cool. But I know, I agree with that. You know, you got Slipknot as well. You know, they're kind of like a band that have literally like, you know, they kind of started the whole mask thing really and really popularized it. So I don't think it's, you know, it's too out there to say that, man, at all.
Yeah. I think, is it Mushroom Head? Won't those fans get annoyed at you for saying Slipknot started that? Is that them?
Yeah, I'll probably be crucified by Mushroom Head fans now.
Yeah, that was as far as, yeah, they're the ones that all the diehard fans are like, they didn't do that first. It's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Because Slipknot, I think a big part of for them doing the mask thing, my understanding is so that they could get on stage and sort of bare all and not have to worry about like being them, if that makes sense. It kind of removes, ironically, by removing the personal, the face to it, you can sort of, you know, I suppose you remove that fear of judgment, which is quite an important thing in that.
Yeah, for sure.
In that regard, yeah. So the other thing, which I was saying this would be the shorter conversation, but maybe it wasn't. I don't know. The other thing was you talked about sort of being a bit of a Luddite when it comes to like, you know, social media and stuff and the reels or whatever. But I think there's definitely a calling for like, and obviously you're passionate about vinyls and stuff, and I think that kind of thing. Do you think there's, beyond just your sort of passion for it, do you think there's maybe on a societal level a sort of a do you think maybe the vinyl sort of phenomenon, if you like, the sort of resurgence of vinyl, do you think that's maybe a reflection of a wider sort of shift away from like a digital world on a lot of fronts?
I think it sort of is, but streaming, like you can't deny streaming. Like I absolutely love my records, and it's kind of like almost like a little special place that I have them. But every day I'm streaming, like it's more from, I mean, you can't like pick up your records and take them to work as well. That's another thing. But I definitely think that, I don't know, it could be sort of, my sort of age group. Like I'm 32 and I feel like I'm starting to kind of be a bit more like, okay, maybe I don't need to rely on social media, or maybe I should just put my phone down and not kind of like, there's sometimes I sort of find myself and I'm like, what have I done for like an hour? I've just been scrolling through, not, and you're kind of like, I don't know if it's because I'm trying to be like, ooh, what's the new thing? Or like, what's coming, it's that sort of like psychological thing. But I kind of, like, I really love just having a record and then just sitting down. It sounds so sad, sitting down with like the lyric book out, reading it through. But I usually do it, like on a sort of Sunday afternoon, have a coffee, and it's almost like part of a little ritual. And for me, that's like so much more kind of, I think so much more involving and something that I remember a lot more. And also because vinyls, it's not cheap. So you've got to make sure that, it's an album that you actually really, really want. And like literally all of my records, I know this sounds mad, but I can remember where I was when I bought it, what kind of like emotional state I was in. Whereas like with streaming, it's kind of like, well, just have this bit of that, bit of this, bit of that. And another thing that I always say to to my wife Laura is that I just don't know what to listen to when if someone says listen, put anything on Spotify, I'm like, it's too much choice. Whereas like if I have my record collection, I can be like, okay, well, I'm feeling a little bit of that. So I do think that there is a return to that sort of physical format, and like people are embracing that a little bit more. But equally, again, like technology is, it's a different kind of ball game, I think, when you get to sort of like the newer generation. And that's where you get, I think bands which are really kind of like combining lots of different subgenres together. Like when I used to go to school, it was kind of a bit more tribal, like you had the metalheads and things like that. Whereas like now I feel like everyone can kind of have a little bit of everything, because we have streaming and that's sort of like very readily available, which is great because, you can discover all sorts of different kinds of music, but it just makes things less kind of tribal and less of a sort of, like that's my special thing. And that's what I think for me personally, records are. And I do think, from the wider, just like going, being on Instagram and stuff like that, like I've got a lot of friends that I've made like little pen pals, I guess, just from collecting records. And you do kind of share stories with people, and it's kind of nice to reflect in that physical format. So it's kind of, I feel like I've never like, I could be a politician. I haven't answered like a straight sort of like yes or a no.
No, it's kind of the best way for the longer conversation. It's the whole point. Like, you were talking about editing stuff. Like I don't edit any of this. I mean, well, I make a little front and back of it. I put my music on and all that business, but a little subscribe, click on it. But yeah, I like to just be able to have, I don't know, I really enjoy podcasts. And I think it's nice just to have like, sometimes the best thing when you don't really know if your answer is a yes or a no or a whatever. It's just a normal conversation, isn't it? Like it's funny how I was, I had a question, but I got distracted by my own thoughts about my own podcast because I'm so self-obsessed. Yeah. Oh, what you were saying about like the whole sort of option paralysis thing, where you at least I think there's something to be said for where you can look at your vinyl collection and go, well, this is what I've got, and I think there's so much more appreciation for, like if I don't know, if I'm going for a run or like if I'm exercising, I always put some music on in my ears, and I can sit there for ages, like picking my playlist. But sometimes I think if I just press shuffle and I'll just go. Yeah. I kind of enjoy it a bit more because I'm like, oh, I might not have picked that song, but actually, now that it's here, I quite enjoyed listening to it. So that kind of, when you've got that massive choice in front of you, sometimes the best thing, I think we're so like sort of so radically aware of how many choices we have for everything nowadays. You know, like going as far, I don't know what car you want to buy, or what, you know, or what phone or anything. I feel like if I was just given a choice of like 4 phones, I think I'd be pretty happy with my choice of phone if I picked number 3. You know, it's a bit like The Simpsons when he, you know, in the movie, when he just like blissful ignorance, or just number 3. But
it's true, isn't it? You know, like Netflix is a great example. Like I've spent so many hours just being like, okay, that sort of, I don't know. And you're just kind of like, just give me a small amount. And, you know, but equally, I do like the idea of the shuffle thing. Like I love doing that. And, you know, I'm still, again, a Luddite, but in terms of like iTunes and all that sort of stuff, you know, because I get sent promos a lot of the time. So, you know, I'll put that directly on my actual phone. You know, so like I just shuffle all of them, because then it's kind of like, I think also you like the way that I sort of review albums is I kind of like, you know, I'll listen to it the whole way through, and then I'll start it midway through, and then I'll start it randomly. And, you know, just to see kind of like how the songs sort of attach themselves. And, you know, when you do that with shuffle, like you said, some stuff that you would have never chosen comes up, and you're like, oh yeah, that's actually a really good song. Or, you know, it could be the fact that that song's like, I don't know, track 8 in an album, and you don't always get there. But if you know, just kind of like, you have that moment where you can just put it on shuffle and it comes up and you're like, oh, actually, that's a really good song. I'm going to go back and, you know, kind of listen to that album, that sort of thing. Yeah, you'll get to know that I ramble a lot, man. Like
that's good. It makes my job way easier. Like it's I genuinely, I've said that I'd love to have like a percentage counter, because so many people are so like aware of themselves like rambling. It's like, I don't care. It's good. It's like I don't know. It's the same as any conversation, I guess, isn't it? I quite like it. Speaking of, like when it comes to interviewing people, what do you? Is there anything you feel like you've learned about just like communication, or things that have changed in how you talk to people, you know, even just day to day, from sort of interviewing and speaking with all these artists over the years? Do you feel like your communication style's changed or anything? Because I kind of feel like mine has as well. Like I say as well, I'm just assuming yours has, but I feel like mine has, you know.
Massively. I think one of the biggest things I've learned is wait. Like the amount of times that I've been, you know, like when I sort of first started, and, you know, I was a little bit more nervous and not kind of as sort of au fait with it, you know, I'd be kind of like, you're trying to fill the silence almost. And it's like, sometimes silence is good, because it lets people kind of like gather their thoughts. And a lot of the time, I also watch a lot of, you know, like, I really like people like David Letterman, for example. You know, they sort of open with like a really kind of broad question that will often get some really interesting answers, like the stuff that's on Netflix. I really, really find that interesting. Or Graham Norton, like, you know, really well-researched, interesting questions, I think can often give you a totally different perspective to that person that you're talking to. But yeah, it's definitely, I think, you know, made me different in the way that I speak to people. And sometimes I've noticed it, you know, like when you meet someone and you're like, oh yeah, you're quite interesting. And you sort of like, not start interviewing them, but you kind of like, you're sort of like being like, so why do you do that? Okay, yeah. And then what about this? And they're kind of a bit like, oh, you kind of want to know a lot, you know, that sort of thing. But has that sort of thing happened with you then?
Yeah, loads, particularly when I'm drunk. Yeah, yeah. I definitely. I know what you mean, going into like interview mode. Yeah, definitely. Like when you feel there's a sort of like, you know, a sort of a flow in the conversation, and I sometimes find myself, or like I'll ask unnecessarily deep questions off the back of like a pretty normal conversation. But it's rare that makes a conversation worse. You know. Like most people aren't interested in asking like what football team you support or whatever. Or well, I say that a lot of people are, but you know what I mean. Like in terms of longevity, in terms of relationships with people, like you want to be able to talk about more, you know, profound things. Like not profound necessarily. It sounds quite self-important, but you know what I mean. Like just things that are important to you. And I found myself asking and even saying things that maybe be like, I don't know if I would have said that had I not had like, this is episode 106, I think, something like that. So it's like 100. Well, most of them run over an hour, so like, well, not most, about an hour. So it's like, you know, quite a lot of hours of, and then I watch them back obviously to like get little clips. I say I don't edit them, but I do get all the little clips and stuff. So yeah. I've probably watched back double that, you know. So I definitely feel like the waiting thing, I totally agree on. I've definitely found myself I'm more comfortable with silence, you know, in a conversation. Like if I'm just sitting opposite someone having a beer and we just stop talking, like because the conversation stopped. Like when did people stop being okay with just sitting there? Like old people are great at it. You just sit there and they can sip their tea, and you know, it's a bit of a stereotype, isn't it? But I feel like that's a bit of a lost art. Like the other night, I just there you go. I'm just sitting silent.
I've literally got a cup of tea with me, man, so don't worry.
Way too late for caffeine for me. But yeah, like the other day, I just I wanted to go out for a pint, and none of my friends are around. I was like, oh screw it, I'm just gonna go out and just see if I just meet someone, like, you know, just a group of people. And I was like, when was the last time I ever did that on my own? I was like, I don't think I ever have. But then I saw my friends there anyway, so it was kind of defeated the purpose. But like the intention was there. I was like, I'll just go and have a drink and just like. I was like, I walk into the bar, I'll just order a pint, and I'll just chat to someone, and worst case, just drink my pint and leave, like, you know. But I feel like little things like that, or just, you know, like moments of silence, I think people are quite nervous just to embrace that, and I'm trying to force myself into being a bit more comfortable with that kind of thing. Like, do you find, like, in terms of, like, embracing discomfort, I suppose this is getting into sort of deeper territory in that regard, but, like, are there examples of that in your life where you've sort of had to push yourself into like uncomfortable? I mean, I know I'm talking, me going to the pub isn't massively uncomfortable, but some people would find that like really uncomfortable. I think I'm fairly socially confident, so I don't mind doing that. But for some people, that'd be like a huge, huge thing. Are there things that can you think of anything, whether it be in your musical world or otherwise, where you've like sort of stepped out of your comfort zone in that way?
I would say probably, you know, like when I first started out, you know, being a PR, a lot of the time you'll have to go meet the entire band. And that's 5 people often, or, you know, like 4 people who are very, very close and aren't always the most welcoming, you know, so you're kind of not going into a hostile territory, because it's not. But it's just kind of like, I think you have to know sort of, this is another thing actually that I've definitely like learned, is know when to not talk and when to just shut up and let the other person kind of like just kind of go with their thoughts and things like that. Because I used to be so bad at that. But then equally, actually, I think you have to be quite confident as well, because, you know, at the end of the day, you've got that person on the other end of, you know, your interview, and, you know, more often than not, the band won't know much about you or anything like that. You've got to own it. Like, you're the person who's like, I want to ask you questions. So don't kind of be sort of, you know, nervous behind it. Like, you know, you do need to own it. And I think I've kind of taken that into account, into just kind of, I think also how I interact with people. Like you said, you know, like when you meet someone new, you have to be, you know, because you sort of, it's almost like it's not uncomfortable anymore because you've done it so much, you know. And I just find it really interesting talking to all sorts of different people, and you get to learn about like different walks of life, different experiences, you know, like, and I think it really broadens your sort of overall perspective. But I would say probably, you know, when I first started out, less so now, because I kind of know what to expect, when to talk to people, you know, like, for example, at bands, like backstage and things. But, you know, sometimes it was a bit like, ooh, okay, there's quite a lot of people here, and I'm kind of like, hello, I'm the PR, hello. And they're like, so what do you do? You know, like, I remember sometimes it'd be like, you're the journalist, right? And you're like, so close, so close. But yeah, I think that's definitely something that's kind of pushed me out of my comfort zone for sure.
Yeah, I know that. I definitely know that feeling of, because I've had some quite deep conversations with people about personal things. You know, things that are very personal to them, about things like their mental health or their situation, or and sometimes I kind of, you think, yeah, I've got a really good question, but it's like pushing into territory of like, is that too far? But, you know, it's the sort of question I like to think as a friend I would ask them. But obviously I met them like an hour ago. So, like, I think building that trust up, I've definitely found I can even think in my head of a few interviews I've done where I've felt like it's taken about, you know, we chat for an hour and in 50 minutes, I'm sort of figuring them out. And in the last 10 minutes, just like click and suddenly we get on really well. And I think that figuring out aspect is something to kind of work through as well. I think accepting that you don't always like click straight away. Like some people, even as soon as the camera's like, as soon as we join the call, they're just like super chill. Have you had, I wouldn't ask you to name any, but if you had any where you got out the other end of it, you thought, oh Jesus, like that was
hard work.
Was difficult, yeah.
Yeah, I had them in person, which was even more fun.
Suppose, yeah.
There was a festival. I think it might have been Bloodstock actually, and there was a band there, and I remember I think the interview was only about like 10 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime, man, because everything was just one word answers, and I was like, give me something, you know, like let me, you know, because you do have to, I guess that's another thing, is you have to think on your feet, don't you? You know, like, because there may be a certain sort of thing you hadn't anticipated that someone's going to talk about, and you're kind of like, oh, okay, well, I'm trying to like bank that question in my head before it goes out. You know, my head's like a sieve, man. But yeah, that was like pretty difficult. Or like you get people who were just sort of like, yeah, just dead standoffish, and you're kind of like, if you don't want to be here, then just don't do it. Like, I'd rather you don't do it than, you know, just kind of do this sort of like half-assed thing, really. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I much prefer the podcast, generally speaking, where I've reached out to them personally and we've started, which is most of them, to be fair. Some of it I've in the late, as time's gone on, I've gone through labels and PRs and stuff, but I find that the ones where they've sort of been like, I've been allocated a time, I always feel like I almost feel like I'm like I've got them on a meter, you know. Especially sure. There's a few where I've not been able to get them for like an hour. We've only been able to chat for like half an hour, and some of them are great, but like and I don't. To be fair, there's not been that many of them. Most of the time, I can get normally like 45 minutes or an hour, but even then, I think mentally it's probably more me than them. But I'm much more conscious of like, you're on a press day. The longer this goes on, unless you're really loving it, the more it's going to feel like hard work, you know. And I think if I just stop monitoring myself, it would probably go a bit better. Do you ever find yourself like self-monitoring in that way? And do you do that like, because also, do you just do that in normal life as well? Because I find I don't do that. I do it in real life, but in a kind of a different way. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I kind of do. I think it's just being aware of, you know, who you're talking to and what they've been doing that day, or, you know, like one of the things I always, you know, sort of like say to a degree is like, you know, first of all, thanks for the, you know, taking the time and all that sort of stuff. But also, I hope it wasn't too painful. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, just keep it sort of like lighthearted and fun, like, you know, because yeah, you know, at the end of the day, they might be asked basically the same question like 12 different times a day. You know, like that's pretty good going to kind of, you know, do that. Especially, you know, some of the smaller bands where, you know, they really want to kind of get as much press as possible. They'll do whatever they can. But I guess sort of, I'm trying to think in like, you know, sort of like personally and stuff. It's just really kind of like being more mindful, you know, of like, I think also it goes to sort of show with kind of like just reading the room, you know, sometimes when you're kind of like, okay, maybe I shouldn't talk about that because that person hasn't had that sort of same luxury or privilege or, you know, something like that. And you're kind of like, oh, I'm just going to come off as like a total knob. I don't need to, am I allowed to swear? I can't, I don't know if I swear.
I've yeah, I've said the worst things to people. It's fine.
Oh, right, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's another thing, where it's just kind of just being mindful of people really, and yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think it's just so easy to get in your own head, like even just on a personal level. Especially if you're like, if you're in a group of people, or I'm definitely trying to work my way out of that habit. I think it's just something you end up getting ingrained. In what school's like, where you say one wrong thing in a group of like your mates, and suddenly you've got like you get shit for a week, like for that one thing, or if you just misspoke. I remember I mispronounced. What was it? I think I mispronounced the word economics because I wasn't sure if it was economics or economics. And I said, like, I sort of went halfway and ended up saying, like, economics. And everyone burst out laughing. I'm like, what? What is that? Like, and then you just, and I think stuff like that is, like, sort of trivial as it sounds. I think it you kind of latch onto it. And then, years later when you're wondering why you don't want to say that thing, that bullshit moment from, like, 10 years ago that you didn't think meant anything. You're like, oh, that's that. I don't know if that's kind of there's in terms of like practical, something that's maybe more practical for anyone that's like listening in the musical world, like what would be your maybe advice for people that in really in any way want to get involved in the music industry, maybe more on the industry front than like the band front,
Sort of like, so like, working at a label or that's like
anything more in the music business, I guess, maybe. Yeah, that you can kind of be a bit more holistic in that sense.
What I did was I just said yes to a lot, to be honest. And, you just put yourself out there. I think it's always, I always felt like whenever, because I did go to university, I went to, the SAE Institute and did a music business degree for 2 years, which was like hard work, man, because it was a 3-year course condensed into 2. So it was just like basically studying the whole time, but also working. And I always remember they used to have like these, like inspirational talks. I'd be like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. Yeah. And then, someone would ask a similar question to this and they'd just be kind of like, just go for it. And you're like, wow, that's really helpful. Thank you so much. Like now I can definitely get into music, but it's just one of those things where I think you have to just be open-minded. And, I interned a lot. I was quite fortunate because I interned with Public City PR for I think it was like 6 weeks or something like that, just very like a short internship. I also interned with Incendia Music, who is kind of like, at the time it was a promotions company but also management, and they manage a band called Voyager now. Lulu was really, really lovely. She was the first person who ever let me intern. And then I interned at the Noise Cartel for quite a while, which was like 7 months, 8 months. And then off the back of that, there was a little bit of luck involved, not going to lie, because there was one of the people there that was leaving the position. And I think it was about a month between me leaving and being offered the job. But I think a big reason for that was because I was always kind of asking questions. I was always kind of, trying to learn more and be engaged. And, I like to think I'm just quite an inquisitive person, like it's probably why I like doing interviews, like, why does this work? And that's one of the things I would say is the biggest thing. And also enthusiasm, like the passion is often something that people have said to me is like a big, reason why it all kind of started, was just because I was like, yeah, man, like I love these bands, like, and also, see if you can work with bands that you really love. But if you don't, find a reason to love them. There's been a couple of things, where like artists that I've worked with in the past, they may not have been sort of, my favorite kind of music, but I've ended up really loving them because they're great people. And then you want to champion them more. You want to be like, no, 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 I swear to God, like this band are really, really cool. You just have to talk to them, that sort of thing. But I would just say, like, don't be a yes man, but just be very open, or yes woman, or, yes non-binary. We live in a multicultural world now. And I would say, yeah, just be open and willing to do and graft as well. To be fair, there's a lot of things that I was just saying there, but they all kind of coexist, I think, in the same sphere.
Yeah, I think like you said, it's there are quite a lot of people out there that say like you said, just go for it. It's like, cheers. I'll make sure to just go for it every day.
Yeah.
I just remind myself of that every morning. Like, cool. It went out of interest. This is, to be fair, more of a question for me than anyone listening. But when it comes to like the growth of particularly your YouTube channel, how did you? What does the growth kind of look like over the years? Because like mine, I know it's literally been one at a time, just going up. And I feel like I need to just stop watching it. Like what's the growth kind of look like to this point? Has it just been slow and steady, or have you had like those 2 or 3 videos that have just like helped your platform kind of blow up a little bit, or what?
There's definitely been a couple of videos that have helped the channel a hell of a lot. Like I did a interview with Periphery, which has got 90,000 views, and I'm like, this is weird. Like it's just kind of like any other interview that I've done, but for some reason it's, and I was like, oh, maybe it was like proper clickbaity title or something like that. But I don't really like to sort of do that, because it's just it's just not truthful. But there's a couple of things, where I think a lot of the time actually it's been to do with like the emotional resonance of it. Like one of my favorites is a chat that I had with the Contortionist, Michael Lessard, who's the singer in the Contortionist. Like he kind of I wanted to know what their album Clairvoyant was about, and it was to do with a friend of his passing, and it was very emotional kind of thing. And I think a lot of people have really sort of latched onto that, but then recently, the Avenged Sevenfold Life is But a Dream review got, I think, 23,000 views or something like that, which is again kind of like, what? How's that happened? It's weird. Like some of it, I'm sure that when I was doing the Metal Sucks stuff, that definitely helped, because they have such a huge reach. But also I've kind of because of the work that I do day to day, like I'm very, very, very busy in that respect. And I have to try and like really plan ahead, even to just get reviews sorted, so that I make sure I've got enough time to listen to them and all this sort of stuff. So I've kind of slowed down on the sort of active promotion of it. Like I used to post on Instagram all the time and, go to people who'd written something about Avenged Sevenfold and like all the tweets and things like that. And now I just don't have the energy, to be honest. That's the God-honest truth. But yeah, it's weird, because there have been certain videos where there's definitely been a big spike, and it's usually bands that have quite a large and quite rabid fan base, like Ghost, for example. I did a Ghost review and that went really, really well. But yeah, it's kind of, over time, it's kind of built a community, because the great thing is that you can get lots of new people in, but the hardest thing is to keep them there. Like they might have, sort of subscribed and then been like, well, doesn't really talk about much Avenged Sevenfold stuff, so this is not really for me. But there's there's been multiple people that have messaged me saying like, I found this video, and it was you talking about this, but I actually really enjoy the fact that you kind of open my eyes to different, other bands and things like that. I'm very aware of like how much I'm talking about myself. It's making me very self-conscious.
Talk about me for a bit if you want. Ask me how my day was.
But yeah, like it's yeah. I guess it's kind of it's been. I mean, I'm also really crap at looking at my analytics. I'll be honest. Like I'm just not very sort of analytics driven. But I do look at them, from time to time. I should probably look at them a lot more. But yeah, it's kind of, it's just been quite steady, to be honest, really. It's kind of, I would say on average, maybe like 10 new subscribers a week, maybe a bit less. Yeah, maybe like, 7 or 8, something like that.
Yeah. It all adds up over time, doesn't it? Like there's a couple of
sure.
podcasts that I follow where they've shown, or if you look at like Mr. Beast or something, if you look at his, I'm always fascinated by what he does. And like, if you look at his channel, it's just like flat. And then there's a tiny little bit, and then it just absolutely skyrockets from like about however many years in he was. And there's a few podcasts I follow where you can see for the first like 3-4 years, nothing much happens, and it's only later on, or even sometimes longer, that things start to like pick up. And I think I had a couple of people say lately, like, oh, I'm surprised you don't have more views on your things. I'm like, I know. But you got to keep grinding, I guess. I've got one more sort of fun question. If you had to pick 3 things that you can ban from heavy music, like 3 heavy music like tropes, if you like. Oh, can you hear all that shouting at the front? I don't know if my mic's picking that up.
No.
Oh, you can't. Good.
Can
Okay, good. That's just Birmingham for you. So 3 like heavy metal or like, heavy rock, like song cliches or things that you hear and you're just like, nah, bored of that now.
Ooh. Wow. Man. I was gonna say a key change, but I'm a bit of a sucker for key changes because,
Okay.
like, sometimes if it's done really well, I think it's cool. But if it's done really badly, then it's kind of like,
Yeah.
and also it can be a little. Actually, no, I'm going to go with key change. Why not? Because it can be quite predictable, as well. Sometimes when you're kind of like, oh right, okay, I knew exactly what you're going to do there, and that sort of thing. I would say.
3 feels a bit harsh now, asking you for 3.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of like what a sort of,
I think people, if you want, I can give you one of mine is
yeah,
whenever you get a breakdown and you just get the same kind of build up to a breakdown every time. You get the sort of the drums building up and then the vocals building with it, and it's like, I get the building up to it is great, but I think people need to be more inventive with how they approach that.
Yeah, okay.
That's
I
one for me.
totally agree with that for sure. Like I'm going to piggyback off of that one.
You can't steal. Okay,
Because,
you can have one, fine.
there's been so many times where I'm like, oh, here we go. Like I think not the latest Lamb of God album, but the one before that, the self-titled one, I was kind of like, oh, okay, here we go. We're gonna like really, really, oh, okay. Just sounds like everyone else. Great. It's kind of it's just too sort of predictable, I guess. I was gonna say like, the sort of like James Hetfield, yeah, but I kind of love that.
I've got one more actually now because I've asked you this and I'm like, I want to say mine. There's one that always gets me is whenever anyone makes the reference of a moth to a flame. Yeah, how many bands have referenced that now? It's just like, actually speaking of, Metallica did it recently, didn't they? In not the last album, but the one before.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure there's a Trivium song. I'm sure. It's just like, it's such an overplayed lyric, and it's a weird lyric. It's like, it's not like a normal. It's not like a day. You don't say that day to day, but for some reason, people have decided they like that lyric, and I've heard it countless times.
Yeah.
And it just.
Oh, actually, I think one that I would say is like, all the sort of like jump the fuck up motherfuckers and all this sort of stuff. And you're just like, man, this has been done 1,000 times.
Yeah.
It's so boring.
It feels a bit contrived at like live shows and stuff when
they're
like, right, everyone get down. You're like, what? Why can't we be bothered? Like, and then if you're not far back enough, you have to get down because you're in, otherwise you just stood there like a lemon, like, stood there in the third row back, like, okay.
That's definitely one, like, everybody get down for this song. It's like, no, that's Slipknot's thing. Like, they did it with, Is it sick or is
It's
it I?
spit it out.
They spit it out. That's
Yeah.
it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was like, oh no, maybe it's surfacing, but no, they always do that. Then they play surfacing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of like just let that be their thing.
Mm.
You know, like why does everyone have to copy them? It's cool, you know. It probably looks good, doesn't it? You know, for the socials.
Yeah. It just, there's got to be, well, I suppose, how many ways can you tell people to go nuts? Like, there's only so much without inciting violence. There's only so much you can tell people to do. Like, I suppose, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're at the heart with the hardcore pits and they're all like windmilling around, I don't even go near that. Like, it just terrifies me. Cool. Well, I think we've covered quite a range of things. Hopefully, my new mic is, well, it's not even a new mic, it's actually an old one. But it's I've tested it with a few like guitar. I teach guitar and I've done a few lessons, and everyone's been like, "It sounds good." So, and I've listened back and I'm like, "I think it sounds good." So, hopefully,
Yeah. It probably sounds way better than mine. I'm just using the computer mic.
That's all good, man. Well, no, I'll probably find there's something wrong with it by the time I get around to editing this, but we'll find out. I definitely need a better like pop shield. It currently has a sock on it, so so yeah, cool. So I need a question to start the next podcast, and also I need an artist that you want to. Oh, I forgot to mention that, didn't I? Like if you've got an artist that you think deserves some love,
Okay.
to spread the word, I'll give them a share.
Okay. So the question is, if you could have dinner with anyone living or dead, who would it be?
Nice. Are they allowed to be dead when you're having dinner with them?
Yeah, it makes things more interesting. It's more metal as well, right?
Yeah, you've got Jimi Hendrix sat there like, folded over his
Well,
chair.
yeah, they wouldn't exactly have much conversation with it. But, okay, they'll be reanimated, but you know they were dead before.
Yeah,
So
can
you
they?
could ask anyone anything basically,
Can they look dead? But, like,
and
real life.
they look dead. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm ruining this. Go on.
And then what band? Hmm. Can I do one personally and one from one of the like some of the bands I work with? Is that all right?
Yeah, go on. Okay, fine.
That bending the rules?
No, that's just bending the rules. That's fine.
Okay.
That's cool.
So the first one is a band that I work with called Hell Ripper. Absolutely fantastic band. They're on Peaceville, doing really, really well. And they're supporting Midnight at the moment with like lots of festival appearances and all that sort of stuff, who are also a really good band. And they're sort of like black thrash, but all inspired by Scottish folklore. Really, really, really cool. So definitely wanted to shout out James and Hell Ripper. And then the band that I just want to shout out. Oh, do you know what? I'm going to shout out Ern, because I had a sick conversation with Joe from Ern back on Friday, and their new album is absolutely brilliant. I think it's going to turn a lot of heads, and they're just really, really nice dudes. You know, it's proper like London geezer, which is which is always fun. Yeah, so definitely shout out those two, Ern and Hell Ripper.
Awesome. Is there anything you want to sort of plug to finish up?
Well, I mean, obviously, like, you know, it would be a shame if I didn't mention the actual name of the channel, which is the dumbest name ever. Basically, the way that this kind of came about, right, is my friend and I, he was kind of like doing all the back end, you know, like HTML and all that sort of stuff. And he was like, well, why don't we make a website that will be like the new Blabbermouth? And it was called TheMetalTris, right? So over time, he kind of didn't really want to do as much and kind of was just like, you know, I'm not really kind of feeling it, and sort of took a bit of a back seat. So I was like, okay, well, cool. I'll move on to something else. But using the audience that we'd got from the meta list, I was like, it's a good thing to like transition. Oh, I know, TheMetalTris. And now I cannot honestly, like, if I could change it to anything else, I would. But then equally, I think it's definitely my brand because it's stupid and simple. Do you know? Do you know what I mean? But yeah, obviously, you know, like check out any of the interviews that I have with bands. And, if you like overly positive album reviews, then you know where to go, basically.
I could leave you like a 2 out of 10 review on TripAdvisor if you want to balance things out.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually my alter ego, is I just go on multiple people's TripAdvisors and just give them like 1-star ratings.
Yeah, find like your Google business and just give you a 1 star. The last time I did that was the local garage that messed up my car. Well, I didn't mess it up, they just didn't fix it and charged me for some other shit. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. It's not really very exciting to talk about on a podcast. So yeah, cool. Well, thank you, man.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me, man.